My friends, welcome to another episode of Diner Talks with James. I'm James, and I'm pumped to be here with you all, kicking it in the diner, my friends. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you notice that we have polished the black and white floor for you. That's right, just for you, my friend. Thank you for coming and hanging out in the diner with me and the whole crew. Friends, I am excited about who is sliding in the booth with me today. Let me tell you about this incredible human being. Dr. Marisa G. Franco is a psychologist and a friendship expert. She identifies as a psychologist for the people, and she is passionate about sharing research with the people that it could help the most. That's why she and I are hanging out right now. I need help, y'all. I need help. Okay, anyway, she is a professor at the University of Maryland, Go Terps, and the author of Platonic, How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends, being published by Random House, i.e. Penguin, which is adorable. It's got a little penguin on the side. Okay, anyway. Also, Dr. Franco has been featured as a guest on Good Morning America, The Today Show, and NPR's Here and Now. Speaking of Here and Now, my friends, let me introduce you to Dr. Marisa G. Franco.
Hi, everyone.
What's up, friend?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here.
Good to see your face. Excited to be here. And I'm excited that you are here as well. Now, you are currently a faculty member at Maryland. Are you in College Park right now?
I am indeed in College Park right now in one of our cool new offices.
Sweet. That's awesome. That's so fun. That's so fun. Now, Dr. Franco, this is a show called Diner Talks. And so we got to start out with your order. I want to know what you would normally eat. If we were late at night having a bite to eat, it could be back in your hometown. I don't even know where that is, but we'll get to it. Or it could be like your favorite bite around DC. What is your late night move of choice?
Tonight, I feel like I want to go for some chocolate covered pancakes with whipped cream and maybe some of those like really like jelly sweet raspberries.
I am already infatuated with you. What a professional order that is. Well done, my friend. Now, well done. I love that. Now, and you said chocolate covered. So we're doing like a Hershey syrup on top, not chocolate chip pancakes.
You know what? I did mean chocolate chip. Thank you for checking in on that, James.
Well, we got to make sure we get the order right. Yelp is we live and die by it. But so that's amazing. I am a huge fan of chocolate chip pancakes. The reason why I love them, besides it's chocolate and pancakes, is because of the little crunch you get from the chocolate chips on the griddle.
Yep.
It's an added flex. And yeah, for sure. I so appreciate that. So you are currently in Maryland, or Maryland for people who know, but I'm wondering where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in New York City.
In the city, which borough?
Oh my gosh, Staten Island.
Staten Island. She didn't want to claim it.
I didn't want to claim it.
She hoped there was not a follow-up question.
Always follow up.
Staten, it's probably Jersey Island.
Basically.
That's incredible. So born and raised in Staten Island, New York. That's so fun. I've had some of the best pizza in my life on Staten Island, though.
You have the best pizza, absolutely.
It's an incredible, it's incredible. But Staten Island is also a culture all to its own. So many cops that live out there, a lot of first responders that live out there. It's of all the boroughs, it is by far the most conservative. But it is. The accents are just perfect there, though. They're exactly what you want to hear when you walk in a New York City street.
Yeah.
It's pretty idyllic. Tell me about growing up in Staten Island. What do you have any siblings? What were you like as a young child, Marisa?
That's a great question. So I do have siblings. My parents were married before they met, so I have 3 sisters from their previous marriages, and then one brother. Kind of grew up with one brother and one sister out of those 3 in Staten Island. My dad is from Italy, and my mom is from Haiti, which
Okay.
which was interesting because I think in Staten Island you have like these like fourth generation Italian kids, right? Who
Mhm.
still, I guess, know the curse words and like eat Sunday dinners. I don't know. There's like
Right.
certain
Yeah.
aspects of the culture that really remain.
Mhm.
But for me, my dad sent me to live in Italy when I was younger. But just being biracial, I don't think people were like, "You're Italian," but I speak Italian too. So it was, I guess that's a bit of a weird experience in some ways.
Yeah, but actually, how do they meet?
They met in Brooklyn, New York. My mom put an ad in a newspaper at the time that was like Caribbean Queen looking for XYZ, and my dad had responded to it.
That is, and it worked. This is
It
like,
worked.
this is how online dating came to be, because we said these ads are inefficient, and and away we went. That is so fun. I also love your mom's immediate charisma of like, yeah, I'm a Caribbean queen, so let's go, let's
She
go.
indeed was and
Yeah.
is.
That's awesome. So in the household, was your mom also a first generation
Yep.
Haitian American? Okay.
Yeah.
So in the household, what were all three languages spoken? Like, what were you taught? How was culture taught to you with those three disparate upbringings?
That's a great question. So, my mom came when she was younger, and she also came at a time when there was these dictators taking over Haiti, and it was feeling really unsafe. So, I think she was kind of afraid of me going back to Haiti. And my dad, he came from Italy. He was like 25. He was a lot older. So, I do feel like growing up, his culture was a little bit more privileged, especially
Mm.
because in fifth grade, they sent me to live in Italy to meet my family there. So, I lived in Rome for a little bit amount of time, and that's where I learned Italian. But later on in my life, I was like, I would really like to learn Haitian Creole too. So when I was in graduate school, I spent 2 summers teaching at a social work school in Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
Mm. Rome and Port-au-Prince, slightly different. In one, you have an endless supply of soupli, and it's delicious. And
Yeah, I love soupli. Oh
oh,
my
so
gosh.
that's dangerous. It's dangerous. It's Rome's equivalent of arancini, and I don't know which one's better. Give me them both. But
Are
still,
you
the
Italian too,
I
James?
am. Yeah, I am Italian. Yeah.
Oh,
Yep. My family is
gotcha.
from Potenza, which is kind of like the southeast portion. But again, much like I was more of what you described, right? Fourth generation Italian. So I did only know the curse words and how to say the noodles correctly.
But
Um,
supli and arancini, that is really a high level Italian, I think.
oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Please tell my father. Um, but my mom's Irish, so I had two cultures as well. Growing up, but in a very different way, because again, fourth generation versus first generation, the stories are taught a lot differently.
True.
Yeah, but being able to go to Port-au-Prince had to be an incredible experience, right? Haiti is one of those places on earth that has been dealt quite a shitty hand,
Mhm,
and then not been handed enough, and really
mhm.
kind of been in many ways uh, just like the place that a lot of people feel bad about, but no one knows what to do. And it is very disheartening to hear what is continuously happening in Haiti. Now, when you went there when you were younger, what was the state of Haiti at that time?
I went there during a period where it was relatively stable,
Mm-hmm.
and I just enjoyed it so much, James. I think I had some of the best times in my life. Like,
Awesome.
yeah, because I feel like going to Haiti, since it's not a big touristy country, you kind of get to experience raw culture. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was a day when we just like hiked down to a beach, and we're like the only ones there, aside from these guys who like picked up fish for us in the middle of the beach, and then brought those fish back and smoked them to it for us, and then fed them to us. So I don't know. It's just it's something special when you don't get like the doctored version of a country and you
Yeah.
feel like you're, I don't know, just interacting with like really real people. And I think too, for me, the way I'm received is very different in Italy versus Haiti. In Italy,
Hmm.
people don't see me as Italian until I might speak some of the language. But in Haiti, my skin color makes me very privileged there. So
Hmm.
people accept me, or are a lot more likely to accept me off the bat. So yeah, I did find myself kind of connecting more with Haitian culture than Italian culture, just because of some of those different racial dynamics across the two countries.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, being more light skinned in Haiti versus being not just straight up white, right, and not that Italian olive complexion as they call it. Yeah, puts you at two completely different sides of the social ladder. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, and I love what you talked about also. There is something about walking around Rome and seeing the Colosseum and seeing the aqueducts, and so like Rome is, it is incredible city to spend time in. It really is breathtaking and special, but you do feel like you're, especially as an outsider, you're just walking around a museum.
Hmm.
And there's some things you're allowed to touch and some things you probably shouldn't. All of the restaurants are completely catered to you. You go to one restaurant and there's 8 different languages in there. That's actually how
Hmm.
we picked our restaurants, is that we went to the places that didn't have all 8 languages listed. Because if we did, we're like, that's definitely a tourist restaurant. And we're trying to figure out where the Romans eat. And so, versus your experience in Haiti, where you actually got to dive into the culture. That makes so much sense to me that you would find yourself more attached to it for that reason. One of the
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Thank
So,
you.
young Marissa gets to go to Italy for a while. Also gets to spend some time in Haiti. Gets to do some cool things. When you have this book on punching loneliness in the face is what I'll call it. I know that's
That's
your
great.
tagline, but I'm curious. Before we dive into some of the depths of that, I want to talk about young Marissa's social scene. Right?
Yeah.
What were you like as a young human, and did any of that influence even wanting to get into psychology or anything like that?
Yeah, I would say I was always kind of smart and uncool.
Own it, work it.
Yeah, growing up, looking back now that I understand human connection so deeply, I see the ways that I assumed I was less than others and didn't even try to create a connection with them, right?
Mm,
And one thing that I tend to say is like often the people that reject people the most are the people that fear rejection the most, right? Because if you're like you're going to reject me, then I'm going to be closed off and
yeah.
withdrawn, and I'm kind of going to try to reject you first. And I think growing up, really that was my sense. Like it's almost like I tried to find the other people that were not cool because I was like, those are the people that will accept me, and the people that are cooler probably won't accept me. So it became sort of a self fulfilling prophecy. In high school, I went to a very nerdy high school. So I went from
Mm.
being uncool to unnotable, I would say.
Another feather in the cap.
Exactly. I was like going from like a D grade popularity to the C plus or something. And so that's, that was that. I wasn't chosen for any of those like superlatives or anything. I just think I didn't really stand out, especially
Yeah.
when all the kids were just so smart. So I was like middle of the road there. Um, and then in college, I feel like in college, I learned to start choosing friends that I really connected with.
Mm.
And I made some close friends. I wasn't good at making friends. Like I think some people they come to this field because they maybe Smiley, for example, who you interviewed before, they have a natural knack for like really connecting with people. But for me, it wasn't that. I wasn't bad, I wasn't good. Again, maybe C plus, but I was fascinated by the topic for other reasons. And so I started to really read all of the research. And so I became better, I will say, through earning like improvements in how I socialize and connect to other people, and understanding what I was doing wrong, which, if you don't see how your behaviors impact people, you often just think it's the world. Like people are untrustworthy, or people are not friendly, or people are closed off. And that's just how humans are,
Hmm.
without recognizing, oh, there's some behaviors I'm putting out in the world that are influencing people to respond to me this way.
Yeah. Yeah. What are we mirroring that we don't know? What are we projecting that we don't necessarily, we aren't immediately self-conscious or conscious of? Yeah. I love that. The journey between the two schools. And I'm wondering, in high school, did you have a small group of friends that you kind of rolled with, or was it kind of loose connections of based on proximity?
Yeah, I had a small group of like, we were kind of like alternative kids. I mean, growing
Hmm.
up in Staten Island, we were in like the Gay Straight Alliance, which is what it was called at the time.
Yep.
And there weren't a lot of students of African descent. And so we were all sort of part of the same group. And yeah, I guess we were kind of like the creative, sort of like countercultural bunch. Looking back, I don't know if those friends really fit me or if it was like the friends that were like felt most available to me at the
Yeah.
time, because I don't talk to all of them now. I mean, they're all great people, but I think now I have a better sense of like what makes me want to be friends with a person, what makes me feel really compatible and good around other people.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that they're all great people because you had to cover your ass. They're all big listeners of the show. So I'm glad we covered that. In high school, even middle school is when we start to write stories about ourselves, about who we are not. And your self-awareness as we look back is obviously, some classic, beautiful hindsightness. But that's a technical term. But I'm wondering, looking back at it, what were some of the stories that you told yourself while you were, feeling uncool or unnotable, as you mentioned?
I feel like there was this disconnect where if you asked me to describe myself, I wouldn't be negative. I might say something positive because I felt like at that time, showing off, seeming strong or put together to other people was how you make people like you,
Yeah.
right? So I might have described myself positively, but I think implicitly, like unconsciously even, I felt more negatively about myself. And I think you can see that in how someone interacts with the world, not necessarily from asking them directly, right? So the fact that if I was around someone I thought was cool, I just like wouldn't talk to them and would kind of like dip out of that interaction. And I self-selected into the uncool group because I thought that was the only place I could really belong in, or yeah, or just like some like overcompensating behaviors, right? Like not being able to admit, there are these ways that I don't feel good, but and then saying, these are all the ways that I'm actually really great. So I
Yeah.
think you could have, maybe an outside of observer might have been able to say she has some insecurities, but I probably wouldn't be able to say that myself.
Right. Fascinating. That's such an interesting way of putting it, because I guess, yeah, that's the beauty of going into of getting a counselor in my 20s. Was like I could look back and name it then. Could I have named it when I was in the moment? I don't know. I think I could have named that I had a low self-esteem. And I think I could have named that I wanted people to like me, but not to the depths of it, that it truly has impacted me in the way that I show up in the world. And so, yeah, fascinating. Yeah, you got me thinking. So
Thanks,
I
James.
appreciate that. The reason why I love asking that question is because as I think about making friends as an adult, and making friends period at various points in life, we carry all those lies, those stories, those whatever is with us into every interaction. You highlighted it before, where you said that you put up a lot of walls so that you protect yourself. I took myself out of the game before you could reject me,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, right? When I was younger, my dad always used to tell me to make fun of myself before anybody else did, because then everybody would know they wouldn't be able to get to me, right? So, well, I'm not going to be able to say anything as mean as he says to himself, which just really primed the stand-up comedian in me, and the person who needs years and years of counseling. But maybe I got too good at it, Dr. Marissa, is what I'm saying. But anyway, that's that. We can come back to that. But it's those stories that impact the way that we initially show up. And
Yep.
so here's something that you pointed out that I want to come back to. When in college, you said that you had a few groups, a cool little group of friends, and then you started to apply what you were learning into making connections. What a fascinating moment. Did you find that it was robotic a little bit in the beginning? Like, is it kind of like your training wheels of like, hey, do I ask this question in the right way? Okay, now is the time where I have to ask them where they're from. Okay, now I must respond with a witty, right? Like I know you didn't necessarily write scripts for it, but how did you work it so that it eventually became natural to you? What did you have to overcome, and how did you eventually overcome it?
Yeah. So how I see it is that we're sort of inherently social and we're inherently loving, and it's more so about like releasing obstacles and fears, and then those behaviors do feel really natural to us. So for me, as I like was reading the research, like for example, in college I thought being making friends was about me seeming really interesting and charismatic and fun and entertaining, right? And I didn't think about how I was treating others. I just thought about almost like elevating myself above people to connect with them, right? They would think I was special or particularly smart. And yeah, like having power over people is a way to be loved, right? And as I read the research, I learned, oh, actually, people like people that like them, that make them feel comfortable and make them feel loved, right? And so it wasn't like I had to like do something stilted as much as I was like, oh, those ways that I already love people that are there, I can just start letting them out. Like I could actually tell people that I like and value them. And that doesn't take, and now it changes my framework that would take something away from me because I'm not the special one, right? I'm not the smart one, but rather this brings something to me to love other people because that's what I'm feeling in my body too, and it actually feels really good to like love other people. So I would say it's about releasing some of the defense mechanisms and allowing us to like just be in touch with our core, which is just inherently loving and inherently able to connect with others when we're not so afraid.
Y'all, first off, if you're listening, I need you to rewind it and play that part again because you need to hear it one more time. Secondly, so you mentioned that the research shows that I forget exactly how you put it, but how when people take a vested interest in us, then we are inherently more likely to like them.
Yep.
Did I put that correctly? So can you tell me a little bit about that research and just like, how, what are those, maybe what those numbers are, or just kind of like, how do they come up with that?
Yeah. So it's called the theory of inferred attraction. And it's like if you infer that someone's attracted to you, you're going to be attracted to them, not sexually, romantically. And so they've done it in a bunch of different ways. Like one is like they'll ask you how close you feel to a friend, for example, and then how much you think that friend likes you. And they find pretty strong correlations. Or they'll have you interact with a stranger and ask you, how much do you think that person likes you? How much do you like them? And for example, find that those two things are very linked. There's other research, for example, that finds that the number one quality people look for in a friend is someone that makes them feel valued and makes them feel like they matter.
Yeah. Here's something that you didn't know about me. I don't think, at least. But one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you on the show, besides our mutual friend, one Smiley Pislowski, is that I'm a professional speaker and I travel around, and the main talk that I've been giving lately is called "Do You Even Know Me? How Genuine Curiosity Creates Community." And one of the principles that I teach in that talk is that in social interaction, you have two choices. You can be interesting or interested. The best conversationalists have ability to play both, but that puts a lot of pressure on ourselves. So don't worry about that. I tell audiences, and I tell also, I was like, don't worry about being interesting. I was like, because you're going to take yourself out of the game. I know myself with a low self-esteem. I don't think I'm interesting. I don't think I have all the fun stories. I don't think I have this or whatever. But I said, don't worry about being interesting and be focused on being interested, because being interested is far more memorable in a really beautiful friendship, community building kind of way than someone who is interesting. And it's not that people who are interesting are not memorable. They're just memorable, as you just highlighted by talking about the research, in a different way. And so this is beautiful. As you can tell, I'm drinking all of the Kool-Aid that you're pouring. And thank you. You picked my favorite flavor, which is community. And so for me, as I just turned 40 years old, and moved to, as I told you before we got on, moved to this new community, and moved to Minnesota. And making friends as an adult is fascinating. It doesn't help that we moved in the middle of the pandemic, which everybody literally there were walls up in front of our faces, and in terms of people and distancing and things like that. So it was hard. But making friends as an adult is a fascinating endeavor. And I'm wondering first, I would love to hear about you personally. How do you go about making friends as an adult? And then we're going to talk a little bit about what the research shows.
Yeah. So James, I have a good example. Do you mind if I combine it with the research along the way? I'll tell you about how the research has impacted how I show
When
up.
you're good, you're good. Do it.
Okay, awesome. So I went to Mexico City recently. It was a solo trip. I booked it because I was like single at the time of booking, not at the time of going on the trip. And I was like, how do I see this as an offering? I think I see my singlehood as an offering by doing things that I wouldn't do typically when I'm in a romantic partnership. So I booked this trip to Mexico City, 10 days, traveling solo alone in Mexico City. And for me, I'm an introvert, but I realized that my comfort level is interacting with someone once a day. So if I go a day without interacting with someone, I'm going to feel bad. So I realized I have to connect with people while I'm there. Otherwise, I'm going to feel bad. So I'm sitting in this coffee shop next to this guy. He starts speaking American English. And here's what research goes through my mind. Research on something called the liking gap, which finds that when strangers interact, they tend to think people like them less than they actually do. So people are more like us more than we think they do, right? And the more self-critical we are, the more pronounced the liking gap is, right? And I know he's a psychologist who has some research, and he finds that he asked people to strike up conversation with people on a commute. And he found that no one was rejected, not one person. And so what this research tells me is that people are way less likely to reject me than I think they are. And if I try and I shoot my shot, I'm actually like a lot more likely to be accepted. Other thing that I remember from the research is that when you assume people like you are going to like you, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because when researchers told people, you'll go into this group, you'll be liked, it made them warmer, friendlier, more engaged, right? So I assume that he's going to be open to talking to me because that's fundamentally going to change how I relate to him in that moment. So we talk and we're interacting. And, he says he's from California. He's a law student. Cool. What I'm also thinking about is the research on transitioners, which is that people who are at times of transition, just moved to a new city, traveling, just retired, for example, tend to be more open to connection. So based on all this research, I'm like, I'm in a pretty good place to bet that this guy's going to be open to connecting with me. And he is. So I asked him, hey, would you be open to sharing contact information? I'm actually going to this event later. That was a language exchange that I found on Meetup. And I'd love to invite you. So he says, yes, we go to that language exchange. Of course, there's research on networking that finds that when people go to networking events, they tend to talk to people they already know, even though 95% of people are at that event to meet new people. So what I know when I go to a social event is that everybody wants to talk to someone new. They just need someone else to initiate. They're too afraid, right? And because I have that knowledge, now I know, okay, if I can talk to people, they're going to be interested in talking to me, like just by the nature of this very event. So I meet a guy there. I ask him to exchange contact information. I invite both of these guys to Lucha Libre wrestling match.
Fun.
Yeah, it was really cool. Between that event and the wrestling match, I went to a Spanish language class. And again, knowing people, transitioners want to connect, people are going to be less likely to reject you than you think. I asked people in the class to also come to the Lucha Libre and to have lunch after class. Nobody ever said no.
We got the big table in the back every time. Fascinating. So this book that you wrote, Platonic, is one of the goals behind it to demystify the science behind connection so that people can walk into, like you did, into this conversation with a rando in Mexico City, and say like, oh, well, hang on, if I do my calculations correctly, right? It's like, it's so fascinating because you kind of have this like calculator going of like likelihood of person interacting with me. 85%, good enough. Right? Like, right? You
Yeah.
banged out the numbers. But those numbers were, hypothetical numbers were enough to push you over the edge of, if community is going to happen, if communication is going to happen, it has to be initiated. The research has told me that most people will not initiate it, but the research has also told me that given all the circumstances I've learned, that this person should want to communicate with me, so I feel more comfortable taking the risk.
Yep.
Is that essentially a little bit of what your book's purpose is?
In some ways, I think in a deeper way, right? Like when you ask people how to make friends, they give you these surface tips like, join a meetup group, find a hobby, right? And I wanted something that broke the surface. I wanted something that would fundamentally change our personalities, because I think our personalities are a reflection of our experiences of connection or lack thereof, right? Whether I'm open, warm, friendly, trusting, cynical, all those traits are predicted by how connected I've been in the past, right? So I kind of wanted something to bleed in a little bit deeper than that, which is why my book is based in attachment theory, which is like a very research-based theory that kind of tells you about how you interact with people and gives advice on how to change that. So I would say for me, it sounds very mathematical as I share the story, but it's more so that this information has really sunk into my bones so that I'm just less afraid of people than I used to be. Like I was I think most of us are afraid of people. Like the paradox of people is like, we really need people to function, but at the same time, they're the scariest thing, the biggest threat that we possibly have. So, reading all this research, it was like cognitive behavioral therapy, I guess. Like it just corrected all these false beliefs that I have and that most of us tend to have, because as humans, our brains are about helping us survive. They're not as more so than they're about helping us connect. And those two things can be antithetical, right? Because if I just want to survive, I might withdraw from people or be closed off because they pose a threat to me, right? And so I think the research just corrected all of my survival fears, and I realized these fears aren't as likely as I thought they were. So now I can just free myself up to connect.
Yeah. I love that, and I hope you did not feel insulted when I implied the mathematical
No, not at
piece.
all. Honestly, I love math, so it could have fit. It could have fit.
the shoe almost fit. I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'll take it. So yeah, that is that was beautifully put, and grounding your book in attachment theory makes so much sense because it's a great jump off point, right? It's a highly researched, it's discussed, and an amazing jump off point for this deeper conversation that you're trying to help people to have with themselves, so that they can have deeper conversations with others. And you're right. Whenever somebody asks, like, hey, I'm trying to make friends, people are always like, well, meetup.com, or, join a Zog sports team, or, those kinds of things, which are great and could be great. But what's the deeper way of doing it? And that's what I'd like to focus on next is, in moving to a community, or even being in your same old community but wanting to find new community where you are currently based, what is that next tier of suggestions that you would give to people, right? If I were to ask you, what are the best ways to make a new connection and make a new friend, what are some ideas that you would share?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would share is don't assume it's going to happen organically. I mean, for me on my trip to Mexico City, if I just waited for people to introduce themselves, I would have been lonely for those 10 days, right? Like friendship doesn't happen as organically in adulthood as it did in childhood. Because when we were children, we had what Rebecca Adams, she's a sociologist, she says, for friendships to happen organically, we need continuous unplanned interaction and shared vulnerability. So we get that in school, right? Lunch, recess, gym. But in adulthood, we have work where we see people repeatedly. We're not really sharing much about ourselves a lot of the time. We're not getting vulnerable. So if you don't try, you can really just end up with no friends. Research actually finds that people that think friendship happens without effort are lonelier 5 years later. So you're going to have to make an effort. You're going to have to put yourself out there. What are some options as to how to do that? If I move to a new city, I like to reach out to people I already know and say, I'm moving to this new city, would love to connect with new people. Do you know anyone? Right? So using our pre-existing networks. That's what I did in Mexico City too. That was another way that I made friends.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing that I would suggest is if we know continuous unplanned interaction and shared vulnerability create connection, we need to create that infrastructure for ourselves. So that is why the joining the meetup is helpful, because it gives us the infrastructure for connection to happen over time, right? But the thing that I think college me got wrong, because I remember going to a social club, I think it was Filipino club with one of my friends, and just being like, nobody's talking to me. This is awkward. I guess I'm going to quit. And that's the thing. What I was doing in college, what made me not that great at making friends, I was thinking so much more about how people are affecting me and so little about how I'm affecting people, right? Like, are people talking to me? Are people making me feel welcome? But I never asked myself, do I make other people feel welcome? Do I make other people feel accepted? Do I make other people feel like they belong? Right? Am I making people feel comfortable to interact with me, or am I being closed off because I want to play it cool? There was just a lot more, I guess, like self-absorption, I think, in a way. And what I also realize now that I've read the research is something called the mere exposure effect, which this is based on a study when researchers planted women into a psychology lecture. The women that showed up for the most classes were liked a lot more than the women that didn't show up to any classes. And the psychology students didn't even remember any of these women. It was just that we have this unconscious tendency to like people who are familiar to us and to not like people who aren't familiar. So what that means is I shouldn't judge the capacity for friendship making based on one interaction. I need repeated interactions. It's going to be awkward at first. You're going to feel weary at first. Our brains are sort of made that way, right? So you need to commit to, like, let me join this social group and stay, if it feels like a good fit for me, for like 2 to 3 months, because that's what it takes to form true connections.
Yeah. 2 to 3 months. You just got some people shaking in their boots. Right? Like, what's the last thing I did for 3 months besides breathe? Yeah, right. Like the conversation that you are talking about, the presence it demands, and is so I guess sometimes we feel the need, or many people feel the need, to impress right off the bat. Like, I have to earn it. And that's not the case, right? And that's what you just said. You just said that, like, as long as you keep showing up, that says something.
Yep.
Tina is my wife, and she and I recently 3 months ago signed up for Orange Theory Fitness. And one of the reasons why we signed up for it, it's not one of our sponsors, by the way. But the reason why we signed up for it was first was for health, but the second one was because of community. And 2 months in, we're both like, man, we haven't met anybody. They said we meet people. This is stupid. But then we had to look back and kind of look in the mirror and be like, well, yeah, that's because of our entrepreneurial / travel schedule, because we're always traveling. She's also a speaker, traveling to different speeches. one Tuesday we went at the 3:30 class. The other Tuesday we went at the 9:30 class. The other, and other people are more set rhythms. And so if you want to see the same people and potentially create moments of interaction because of the proximity, because, hey, I've seen you around here before, we have to go to the same class. So, I mean, that's just a perfect example where it's like we're blaming other people, but it's actually our pattern that wasn't helping us.
Yep. And that, I think it can feel both lousy and empowering when you realize, oh, I've been contributing to this problem in my life of relationships, which most of us, that's true. In some way, to some degree, we have some contribution, right? Sans people that are, in abusive relationships, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't often know it. But the empowering part is if I have influence on this, that means I could also change it, right? And that is why I think it's so helpful to talk about attachment theory, to talk about this research. Like, it's not to make people feel bad about themselves, because how would you know? If you don't know, how do you know to change it, right? Yeah. But more so to say, like, oh, you're not hopeless. Like, there's things you can do that can really make your friendship and your community better.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Marisa, let's talk about me for a minute, because, why not? But I want to use this as an example. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it. I am, I've been told that I'm delightful to talk to, right? I mean, I won most charismatic in high school, so I'm just saying, cool. I got some chops over
C+,
here.
Huh?
Wasn't my grades were, but that's besides the point. But still, that's not true either. I just went there for the joke. I was also a nerd, but the things I do for a joke may be related to this next question, but. I often tell myself that I am too much for people, that I am. And I think, when you look at the attachment theories, I think I would love to say that I am secure, but I think I fall in the anxious category, or I don't know if it's anxious or preoccupied, different Google images, different answers. But still, when it comes to this, like, I am constantly ticking because I have a deep desire for people to like me. It's one of my biggest Achilles heels. One of my other fears that I've been working on with my counselor, Sarah, is that I also have this fear of being a burden to others. And so those two things are fascinating. Not wanting people to like me, not wanting to be a burden, and the way that I show up and serve, I often very rarely talk about myself. As a matter of, it drives my wife nuts. I have a few friends that now see the pattern because I've told them about the pattern, because I know I need to work on it. But I am consistently like, I'm from New York. But anyway, more about you, right? Yeah. Oh yeah, I got a kid, but more about you, right? Because it's like, I'm not worth your time, but you're worth my time. Is kind of what I am consciously and maybe subconsciously, or definitely subconsciously, maybe consciously saying. And so for folks that struggle with those kinds of things, a hypothetical situation, of course, what would you suggest are ways to get out of one's own way?
Yeah. I think a lot of people can relate to that, James, feeling like you really want people to like you, and that might change the way you become part of conversation, such that you're really focused on them and you're really afraid to be a burden to other people. I would say, well, first of all, the question is, how do you let go of this compulsive need for people to like you, right? Because then it's going to affect your behaviors a little bit less. And I think it's less about trying to behave in ways that manage people's interpretation of you, and more about, James, like, when people do show that they like you, do you think you register that? Like, do you think you take it in, or do you I don't know, keep it moving, not even really see? Do you see when someone doesn't like you a lot more than when someone does, for example? I'm asking.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. If you were going to try to compliment me right now, I would force you to explain why in order for me to believe you.
Okay.
Right? I'd be like, well, tell me, why do you think that? Yeah, but like prove it to me that you think that. And that a lot of that stems from the stories that I told myself from high school, and whatnot, when I wanted deep connection but wasn't really getting it. And I was convinced that people just liked me being around because I was funny, but they didn't actually appreciate me because they never invited me to things, right? And so that's a whole story that I wrote that I'm working through back in middle school and high school. But that's where it stems from.
Yeah. That makes sense, James. And that I think often tends to be the case. Like we naturally zoom into those threatening moments more than those accepting moments. But I would say, can you start an intentional practice of receiving when people do like and value you, when they compliment you, when they smile at you, when they still seem engaged in the conversation? Like effortful almost, like to just pause and like feel the impact of your body rather than trying to just push it away. Like, what would that be like for you?
I would need to be a work in progress on it. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it would feel nice, right? Like it would be just to walk in and be like, oh wow, that person likes me. That feels really cool. Watch my shoulders go down, watch my neck unclench, watch my right, like that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would totally be a practice. This is, a suggestion based on the work of Rick Hansen, and he's a psychologist who recommends that we take in the good and that we savor good moments to counteract our brain's tendency to focus on the negative and focus on the opposite. And that, well, he argues what state becomes trait, which means what we practice starts to become part of who we are after a while. So that's what I would suggest. The other thing that I would say, right? Our predictions are so wrong. Like that's one takeaway from all the research that I've read, right? You think you're going to come off as a burden to others, right? Our predictions just end up being so wrong. In fact, people that ask for support have more intimacy in their friendships, and often the biggest burden you will place on your friendships is your silence. And I think what I also have trouble asking for support from people. So what I've done is I've started to ask myself, what if they ask me for support? How would that sit with me?
Yeah.
How would that land with me? Because I know if I take myself out of the picture, all those defense mechanisms kind of melt away and I have a more accurate interpretation of reality. So if I'm like, if they ask me for support, I would love to show up for them. They're my friends. I want to show them that I love them, right? And then I let that be my prediction of how I'll come off if I ask them for support.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautifully put, right? Like, I mean, if you were sitting in a room and I told you that somebody outside, one of your friends was outside and they just lost a loved one and they're really going through it and they'd love to talk to you about how they're doing, you would bolt out of the room before I ever even finished it, right? But
absolutely,
if I told you there's somebody sitting outside of the room and they feel like they've noticed that you've been going through something and they want to talk to you about it and let you know that they're there for you, it would take you a lot longer to move.
I feel exposed,
Yeah,
scared.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So rooting this book in attachment theory, tell me a little bit about when you first started learning about attachment theory, where did you fall? There's 4 quadrants, correct? Is this correct? There's secure, anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, avoidant, and fearful, avoidant. Are those the 4?
This 4th is like also called disorganized.
Okay. Yeah. Where would you put yourself and how, let's start there.
Yeah, I would say, funny enough, I was a mix of anxious and secure, but probably had a lot of anxious behaviors. In my romantic relationship, funny enough, I don't know if I would have written this book if I was securely attached, because what motivated this book was like my romantic relationships were a shit show. And I started this wellness group with my friends where we would meditate, cook, do yoga together, and it was life-changing and so healing. And I was like, oh, I thought I was unlovable without a romantic partner. I've always had all this love around me. Why hasn't this counted, right? And I thought this was a larger social issue, that we don't count platonic love, even if it's like it's gold at our feet, but we don't see it as that, right? Like just like we talked about, James, like people could be smiling at you or complimenting you, right? They're giving you love, but you're like, I think that's just how we treat platonic love a lot of the time. We really deprioritize it. But I will say, I think part of how I took that really hard, those romantic relationships, is because anxiously attached people are just more vulnerable to negative experiences in their relationships. They affect us more, and so we need stuff to cope more. But I will say that now, after writing this book on attachment styles, I am pretty securely attached. Like, it really has changed. And the part of the problem was I didn't even know. I didn't even know how it was causing these problems. I didn't even know what the healthier right way to be in relationships was. And now I know.
Yeah. An interesting counterpoint that I could hear a number of individuals potentially make to kind of what we're talking about making friendships, engaging, initiating, et cetera, is that society has its systems. And for example, I love I'll call it courage. You could just call it living. So you put the right adjective on it. But the courage of you solo traveling to these various aspects of the world and putting yourself out there, and talking to a strange man in Mexico City as right, you know what I mean? Like, as a woman, and as a woman of color in the United States, to do that in Italy, et cetera, right? In these places where the shoe doesn't fit exactly, where I could hear a counterpoint, and maybe why some people would be more on the avoidance side is because of safety, right? Especially the one that you were just talking about, the disorganized, the fearful one. But how do people work through some of that besides therapy? How do some people work through that idea of this is not a safe place for me? Obviously, a lot of that fear has come from trauma and so therefore it's earned fear. And let's not be dismissive of that. But that's a tough thing to work through to then eventually build trust up in others.
Yeah, James, that is a good question. And I think our fear is like a really huge barrier to creating those relationships. And based on our attachment style means we bring certain fears. There's no blank slate for us, right? The blank slate is fear if you're insecurely attached. Anxiously attached, I fear you're going to abandon me before you've even opened your mouth. Avoidantly attached, I fear you are going to betray me, right? Use something that I share against you. I fear that I can't trust you, for avoidantly attached people. We bring that to the room before anybody even says anything, which tells us that this actually isn't based on anything someone has showed me, even though it feels so real for me. It's not actually based on the situation if it's something that I assume before the interaction has even started, right? And so I think, for me, becoming more secure has not been that I don't have fearful or scary reactions anymore. Sometimes I do, but I'm able to say and piece apart, like, has there been anything in the situation that has actually showed me that I can't trust this person, right? That this person is going to abandon me? Is there any proof or evidence? That sounds like, cognitive behavioral therapy. Like, if you don't trust someone, what have they done to show you that they're not trustworthy? And if they haven't done anything, right, then it's coming from you rather than from them per se. And so it requires us, I think, to just have a little bit more humility about our stories of others, right? To realize that even though we have this gut feeling that's based in our past relationships, that's a form of learning where our past, we're trying to use that to predict the future, but our predictions are often off. And it's almost like being able to see yourself from a balcony while you're on the patio, right? Like, I see that I'm having that reaction, but I see the sort of larger situation and the larger scenario and what's really going on here and whether this person is actually untrustworthy. So it's that perspective taking. It's that, it's that more holistic and broader view of things that is antithetical to fear. Fear narrows things. Fear says, let me just focus on this one threat. I don't take in anything else about the circumstances. So it's about broadening it again.
Yeah. First off, that was beautifully put. And thank you for that answer. Why are our gut instincts about ourselves so wrong? Is it because of like Maslow and kind of coming down to like we have to protect where we protect ourselves like safety, and that's why because like you said, it goes back to those moments where that didn't happen or when we didn't have it or when something happened. Like why are we so consistently wrong about our self perception or how we show up?
Yeah, well, I would say when it comes to human beings, our brain's first priority is always survival, and
Mhm.
social death is a form of death in itself, right? So I talked to this.
Amen.
Yep, yep. So I have this friend, and she kind of, when we first started interacting, she was like, in sixth grade, a friend told me that my friend group didn't really like me. And since then, I just assume people are rejecting me forever, right? What is happening in that case? She had one negative experience, and I'm sure tons of positive experiences since then. She only registered the negative experiences and the positive experiences since sixth grade of people actually liking her and wanting to be friends with her have not registered in the same way. Likely, and this is true for our friendship, she doesn't initiate with me, right? So inevitably
Mhm.
I'm going to stop reaching out to her because she doesn't initiate with me. She's probably seeing that as, oh yeah, people don't really like me, people are going to reject me at the end of the day. So these stories become so self-reinforcing because they affect our behaviors in ways that make us call forth in the environment reactions to us that match that original story. It's not that it's not that everybody is a certain way that aligns with our story. It's that our story affects how we behave. So we almost are sort of subconsciously manipulating people to match the story that we have of them.
I think I just blew a fuse in my brain, but I'm really happy about it because there were a few synapses that needed to get connected, and you just did it. And yeah, that's a lot to think about, but in a really cool way. Uh, I have not done a ton of research into attachment theory. Based on this conversation, I now know that my wife and I will be having a conversation about attachment theory because we're in different quadrants, and I'd be curious to know what the interplay is there. And so, doing some more research, I can't wait to grab your book and read about it as well. It is. It is fascinating to watch the way we take ourselves out of the game sometimes, and but the reasons that we take ourselves out of the game are different for each one of us based on our attachment theories. And your words today have been uh, hopeful, and yeah, and I love it because there's some people who are going to change because they hear data, and there's some people who are going to change because they felt something. And what you did today was successfully punch both of those things, and and be like, I got them both for you, so buckle up, pal. And and brilliantly put. The work that you do is supremely important. We know this. All research shows that yes, what we eat matters. Yes, if we exercise, it matters. Sure, stretch every day, but the thing that determines the most longest living folks in the world is community. Is friendships, which I'm sorry to all the Instagram fitness coaches out there. But the thing is that this is wildly important. And as Smiley talked about, as you have articulated, we're in the middle of a bit of a loneliness pandemic right now. How do you believe, and this will be my last question for you, how do you believe social media plays a role in this? Or what role does social media play in our ability to connect more or connect less?
Yeah, it's a little complicated. And overall, the research finds that there's not really a link between social media use and loneliness. And that's because it really depends on how you use it. People that use it to reach out to people, to meet them up with them in real life, tend to be more connected. Those people that use it actively, they're like commenting on people's pages, liking, posting, they experience more benefits. Whereas lurking is just toxic and detrimental, right? Lurking, we're just seeing all these people having better experiences than we have. We're not actually engaging with people in ways that do help us feel connected, even in the digital world. When we like affirm people, for example, we're more satisfied with our friendships. And I think the issue is, first of all, that most of the time we spend on social media is usually lurking compared to actively engaging. So it can be a net negative. Second of all, it's the fact that this started with the creation of the television, which was really when we started to get lonely and more and less involved, because all of a sudden we had this snack of pseudo interaction that made it so we had just enough so that we didn't feel like we had to take the risks of intimacy. And before the television, leisure was a public affair. I had time alone, so how can I spend it with my friends? And now just think about how much that's even more compounded with social media, right? Like if I didn't have anything else to do, if I couldn't, scroll through TikTok for hours or Instagram for hours, right? I would have to find something else to use my time. And I just might find a way to connect with people. So it's like these snacks of interaction that don't give us a sort of nutrient filled meal, but give us just enough calories to keep us from seeking those deeper nutrients of face-to-face connection. Because like, there's no doubt that the research finds that face-to-face interaction is the strongest form of connection and makes us feel more connected, even if we are the same conversation on an online platform. Face-to-face conversation is just it's the top, it's the A+.
Yeah, for sure. And, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, some people say burn it all when it comes to social media, but you can definitely use it effectively. It's like any tool, right? A hammer can drive in a nail, or it can put a hole in your head, right? Like you got options, is what we're saying. And it is a tool for interaction and connection if you use it to be one, or it is a tool of loneliness if you want it to be one. I so appreciate you, Dr. Marisa G. Franco, for coming and hanging out in the diner. Your book is coming out if you're listening to this podcast, it already came out, so you need to go and buy it. And but the book is Platonic: How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends. Dr. Marisa, thank you so much for the work that you are doing. As a giant extrovert who just can't get enough of folks, and also desperately needs people to like him, the fact that your book is teaching people to open their mouths more excites me. But I also hear you saying, I need to keep putting in the work, and I need to get out of my own way as well and accept the positivity that people do throw at me, that I figure out a way to switch. Or re-compliment them, right? When someone says, nice shirt, just say thank you, as opposed to, I got it at Target, it was only $12. Right? No one gives a shit. No one cares. Say thank you first. Right, take the compliment. And so, yeah, I really appreciate you for hanging out here with me in the diner. If people want to connect with you, obviously the book Platonic is out wherever people can buy books, but how can people connect with you?
Great question. First, I just want to say, James, this was such a pleasure for me too. And you're such a great interviewer. You really made me feel so comfortable. And that was just so important for me to share more, especially about myself, which I don't typically share, again, as the expert that comes into this topic. So like, you did a great job, and that helped me too. If you want to further connect with me, I am also on Instagram sharing tips on friendship at Dr. Marisa G. Franco. That's DrMarisa G Franco. On my website, drmarisagfranco.com, you can hire me for speaking engagements on connection and belonging, or you can take my quiz, which assesses your strengths and weaknesses as a friend and gives you concrete suggestions as to how to improve.
I love that. Now, don't y'all go start taking this quiz and beating yourselves up, all right? There's no perfect scores, you jerks. Dr. Marisa, thank you so much for hanging out with me in the diner today. It's been so special having you.
It's been great. Thank you so much, James. Bye.
Indeed. Bye, friend. Y'all, that was my time with Dr. Marisa G. Franco. What a legend. My goodness, I do. I have some food for thought about that. I'm sure you do as well, as most of you are adults who I have talked to and are struggling to make friends. There is a whole other conversation she and I could have had about the role that proximity plays in creating relationships and all this kind of, there were so many depths, and I cannot wait to read her book. And I don't normally say that when one of my guests have a book on, but she was spitting the sauce, and I'm here for it, y'all. Thank you so much for kicking it in the diner with me. And as always, keep punching small talk in the face by asking better questions. You all take care.